Welcome to episode 54. I'm sorry, episode 54 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you all for joining me yet again. This is going to be a really great episode. We're talking Kevin McCarthy trying to keep order with the House GOP as Democrats debate the Boebert punishment. Justices on the Supreme Court signaling a willingness to actually uphold the Mississippi law, which severely restricts a woman's right to choose, and which could possibly the floodgates to overturning Roe versus Wade, long awaited for move for almost now 50 years. HBCUs are pressing the Senate to pass the Build Back Better Act now that the infrastructure bill is enacted into law. And we've also unfortunately suffered another shooting in this nation, which is now going to restart the conversation on whether or not we can get some action on Capitol Hill to address gun control. Here to break all of this down with me are three distinguished and very informed and intelligent gentlemen. I'm grateful to have them with me tonight. Nathan Honore, of course, is no guest to the Political Mic. 3L at Quinnipiac University School of Law. Very insightful mind. And it's always a great episode whenever he's on. So, Nate, thanks for being here. We also have Mr. Jordan Strudwick, another great friend of mine from Howard University School of Law, who just graduated with me this past May. Jordan has served in many capacities at Howard Law, namely specifically with me. He was in the Environmental Justice Clinic, and that's where I got to see his insightful mind up close and personal. So, Jordan, thanks for being back. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Reginald Hubbard, grateful to have you on, sir, who used to work with Move On. The organization that is dedicated to, just building coalitions and enacting social policy change from the ground level. So I'm really excited to have him back. It's been a while since I've had him, and I'm grateful to have him, especially for a week like this. So without further ado, gentlemen, let's just get right into it. I want to start off the conversation by addressing, the ongoing back and forth that seems to be going on with House GOP leadership, and with a freshman. Representative, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene now making, seemingly such an impact with Kevin McCarthy that he has to bend over backwards not to offend her or to do anything that would cause any kind of friction. And this is really unheard of, especially from someone who is vying for the speakership. The odds are, historically, the opposite party gets at least one chamber in Congress the following year, and that chamber is usually the House of Representatives. So, the odds are stacked in his favor. But I want to get your thoughts on the back and forth that seems to be going on. Of course, we had a situation where a Republican congresswoman actually made a joke and, doubled down on that joke by making it again, by saying that she was in an elevator with Representative Ilhan Omar and that she was concerned that, she had a backpack on her because she was making some kind of allusion to the fact that Ilhan Omar could be a domestic terrorist, almost a bomber. This kind of bizarre way of making jokes seems to just be becoming more and more commonplace, and the go-to line is, well, we were just joking. We're literally just coming off the heels from Representative Paul Gosar's latest joke. I want to get your thoughts on how Kevin McCarthy has handled this so far, and whether or not you could potentially see that this kind of back and forth getting in the way of the GOP's plans of taking a majority next year.
I'll take the bait. Blessings to all. Mike, thanks for having me back, man. You've been on the come up, like Chris Matthews and all these other cats, yo. So thanks for remembering me now that you got a little bit of shine. You know what I mean? I've retired from La Vie Politique. I'm still in the game. I just left the hustle, right? So thank you for remembering that. And I was intimately involved on the Hill and actually know Rep. Omar quite well. Was texting with her chief of staff just now, being like, look, prayers for y'all in this craziness. I have no respect for Kevin McCarthy, and I don't have a problem saying that because he had a problem standing up against the insurrection. People want to forget that the insurrection happened almost a year ago. And he's been kowtowing to the radical fringe of the Republican Party since the insurrection. In a gamesmanship effort to be the Speaker of the House. And I really think that the problems that we face as a nation should be bigger than Kevin McCarthy's political aspirations and kowtowing to people who seek to demonize and like vilify hardworking representatives of diverse coalitions of the American people, right? So like, I hope it backfires on him, and I do hope it backfires on the Republican Party, and I hope that the people who voted for the infrastructure bill, who were vilified for seeking to like have a compromise with the administration, and part of the reason that I left the left is because I think they're a little too hot too. Like, I think everyone needs to simmer down and figure out compromise, because like going in this direction in both directions isn't serving anybody. But to answer your question specifically, when will it end? Right? Like, does a member have to get killed? Right? You know, Gosar was just like, yeah, I was just kidding. Okay, so I didn't know what it meant. Word. You know, I was talking about it with my aunt and my grandmother today, and then I'll close. To me, this is a relic of a white supremacist legacy where they say whatever they want, they do whatever they want, and any success by people that are not them is viewed as a loss, right? So it's a zero-sum game. And in the past, when blacks were wanted the right to vote, they hung us from trees, right? Oh, well, you know, like, so it is the extremism that has taken on a flair for the dramatic and has lost civility and respect for life. And these types of comments do not belong in the chamber. And I'll stop there because I can filibuster, but I'll stop there.
One thing I'd add is that I think Democratic leadership needs to stop trying to draw a line between who they decide is like the reasonable wing of the party and the fringe elements of the GOP, because really they've become the same thing. The fact that Kevin McCarthy was whipping votes against censuring Gosar for a video he made of himself killing a member of Congress and the president of the United States, you know, that should be one of those things that you get maybe 433-2 voting instead of a strict party line vote with maybe one or two defections on either side. So this is the GOP, like it or not, and so they've owned it. So if you want to actually, protect yourself, you have to own it as well and adjust accordingly instead of trying to keep appealing to our good friends across the aisle. Democratic leadership needs to be just as willing to punch as the GOP is, and they need to be able to punch in the same language. I will say, also add that, infighting on the other side is good for the Democrats no matter what, as long as they know how to take advantage.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Nathan was saying. I feel like they do these things because their base actually likes it. So when we say like, oh, is this going to mess them up and make it harder for them to effectuate their plans? No, it's not, because this is what they were elected to do. They're doing exactly what they were elected to do. So I don't think we can really expect them to feel bad because we point out that obviously this is the woman who receives regular death threats. So when you make a comment like that, in context, it's much more than just those words. It's a call to arms, functionally, and everybody knows that. They know that when they say these things, and when this reaction happens, they're like, maybe I swung a little too hard at the ball. Maybe I swung a little too hard, but I got it to where I wanted it to go. This is what they were elected to do.
Yeah, and the way in which he's trying to go about handling this is, by dealing with all this internal strife privately, and he's trying to avoid alienating any of his members as he looks to retake the House and when the speakers gavel next Congress. But instead of putting his fellow Republicans on blast, he's handling this thing in a low-key lobbying kind of way. To me, the risk with that strategy is that this is already bursted onto the public sphere. You've got almost every media outlet bringing this up. You have this thing in a very public, this public spat out there, and so to try to resolve what's already public privately, to me, serves to show that you're more interested in the political ramifications, the political appearances, rather than actually taking a stand publicly to combat public statement with public statement. These jokes were made in the public. This was not like backroom banter that was overheard on a microphone or anything like this. This was like she was at a party. and then she even repeated the joke and added a little bit more flair to it the next time. So like we wasted so many brain cells, not just on this show, but as a nation, wondering where the bottom line is, where the bottom floor is. And it just turns out there is no bottom floor. There is no line in which the GOP is going to constantly push and say, well, this was a joke. The snowflakes on the left are too sensitive. This is a kind of way to censor us. And we have to like reshift focus, in my view, and just say, look, let's just make this a referendum on who's looking for the speaker's gavel. If he can't handle the disorder and chaos now, how would he handle, making sure that folks are, not sitting on committee assignments, not chairmanships, not in chairmanships who are blatantly doing things like this that are just violating all of the congressional ethics rules and making the workplace even more toxic. I mean, even in, as anyone who's watching, and if you're in the corporate world, good and well that if you were to make a statement like this on a fellow employee, your days in that position would be numbered, or you would be on leave, or some kind of repercussion would happen because of the risk you took and the way in which you represented the corporation. But I want to ask you guys again on the same topic, about whether or not Pelosi now and her leadership have, taken up, appropriate actions. I know, the speaker and her leadership have discussed bringing up a House resolution condemning Islamophobia, which would be an indirect reprimand of Representative Boebert, but no decision has been made yet, partly because Democratic leaders hope to keep the pressure on McCarthy. Is that strategy of letting McCarthy handle his caucus, handle the GOP, is that actually favorable for Democrats in your view, or should they take a more aggressive position?
I'll just second what Nathan said earlier. Like, right is right, is wrong is wrong, and what Jordan said, they were elected to do this. They were elected to act a fool, right? So they're doing exactly what they were elected to do. And as such, as someone who used to be in the guts of electoral strategy, you should call it for what it is, right? At some level, maybe they're waiting for January 1st because they don't want to be quote unquote too political for the midterm elections. But I think they should do a little bit of both, meaning put pressure on McCarthy to show how inept he is at handling his caucus, and at the same time, in the public sphere, be like, hey, the DCCC should go on air and be like, look, do you want these people running the country? Like, they can't condemn an insurrection. They can't, right? They say killing someone is a joke. Do you want these people? Do you want the crazies running the asylum? Is that what you want? I mean, and make it, I think it should be that plain, because otherwise, when you try and parse morality, it doesn't work, right? So, like, do you want this in charge of the government? If yes, word. If no, then rock with us. I mean, I think it's got to be that simple. And sometimes politics is that simple. We're the ones that, like, people in the Beltway are the ones that make it more complicated.
I think we spend a lot of time trying to persuade elected officials when maybe our energies would be more efficiently directed trying to persuade their constituents, because ultimately they're going to continue on doing these things as long as people are electing them to do it. So maybe they do want the crazies to run the asylum. If they identify with those crazies and they, in their opinion, we can sit here and call one group of people crazy, but there's a similar meeting happening somewhere else where they're saying the same exact thing about the people who you would say are the most sane. So given that all of that is so relative, it just feels like that's really where
I disagree about the relativity, just to be honest. I disagree about the relativity because, like, there is no equivocation between, like, threatening to murder somebody and those sorts of things. And what I was saying in terms of just, like, as an organizing tool, I was talking about your point, like, organize voters that do not vote and be like, okay, is this what you want? Like, not to the people that already elected them. That's stupid. But, like, to the people, so we actually agree.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think all I meant was that, like, everyone has a perspective, and whether there's, like, from a neutral, objective perspective, their perspective is right or wrong. It is their perspective, and that's what they vote based off of. They're not really voting based off objective right and wrong, but on what from their perspective is best and not best.
I think a little aggression is good in this scenario. Actually, in all scenarios, I want Democratic leadership to be more aggressive. Bill Clinton said it best: the voters prefer strong and wrong over weak and right. So, do the censures, strip Lauren Boebert of her committee assignments, but also, talk about how the Democrats have to be the adults in the room. And if you give Kevin McCarthy the gavel, all they'll be doing is infighting over who likes Trump more, who can say the most outlandish things. And that's why you need to keep the gavel in, this party's hands as opposed to that party. Actually be aggressive. Of course, we know they're not going to get the messaging right, but, at least make an effort.
Yeah, and so I wanted to just focus a little bit here. One other interesting development this week that took place is that Supreme Court justices, they started to have an argument back and forth about the Mississippi law that garnered, a lot of attention because of the fact that they had a 15-week abortion ban. Now, of course, now that we have Amy Coney Barrett taking Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat, we have now a 6 conservative majority, supermajority in the Supreme Court. And, they were expressing openness to signifying, paring back or completely overturning abortion right protections, which was guaranteed under the landmark case Roe versus Wade. I remember when Amy Coney Barrett was being grilled, she was really ducking and dodging how she would rule as a Supreme Court justice. She said this is not the appropriate setting for that. She can just give her, knowledge or share her knowledge on what she interprets a lot of these Supreme Court precedents to mean. And she called Roe versus Wade a super precedent, which was kind of a weird term to me. But what she meant was like, there's certain Supreme Court cases, Brown versus Board of Education being one, Roe versus Wade, in which there's certain norms that the society has just grown accustomed to because of these landmark cases. And opening the door would open the floodgates to overturning a lot of other quote unquote super precedents. So in this case, Roe versus Wade, of course, was dealing with privacy protections for women's autonomy. And of course, that was in alignment with, other cases. You had cases that were affirming a married couple's right to contraception. You had cases that were, just really falling under what we would call the penumbra of privacy rights in the Bill of Rights. And now that they're signaling some openness, a lot of people are nervous now because the next question is, will this be, something that's literally on the table? I mean, conservatives have been like just salivating to overturn Roe versus Wade since, it became, since 1973, and we're almost at the 50-year anniversary. Being that there's certain norms, the strict scrutiny, the, whether or not, there's some kind of controversy between what the Constitution says and whether or not any kind of state law like the Mississippi law with the 15-week abortion ban violates that Constitution, or whether or not what I'm trying to get at is, what are your thoughts on the chances of the Supreme Court? And of course, it may sound like a silly question, being that there's a 6 conservative majority. What are your thoughts on the chances of Roe versus Wade being overturned by next summer, possibly becoming the election, one of the hottest topics of next year's election?
Very high. First off, upholding this Mississippi law would be overturning Roe, even if the law in Mississippi still does allow abortion up to 15 weeks, because the holding in Roe is that pre-viability bans, as a whole are unconstitutional. So allowing abortion at 15 weeks isn't a compromise. It's overturning the 50-year-old standard that we have set. It also speaks to a larger war on the right as it relates to contraception, as it relates to family planning as a whole, and, when we see what is being promoted these days on the right-wing networks as they talk about the great replacement theory, we see what this is all about. It really is white supremacy on its face, what the right-wing is trying to do as it relates to abortion and reproductive justice in general. I think the probability is very high. The whole point of Trump's justices, of the hundreds of federal judges that Mitch McConnell and Trump were able to put on the federal courts, was that there would be right-wing justices who would be willing to overturn abortion. It's why Neil Gorsuch was put on the court. It's why Brett Kavanaugh was put on the court. It's why Amy Coney Barrett was put on the court, because of their views on abortion. That was the number one thing that Mitch McConnell prioritized in every, step of the way. So it could be this big thing that galvanizes, people in this country who do favor abortion, which is the outright majority of this country. Over 70% of Americans think that people should be able to have an abortion if they so desire. But if the Democrats aren't willing to do things on other aspects, specifically as it relates to voting rights, then it's going to be for nothing.
No, that's a great point. And I'm glad you brought out that viability test. That's been something that a lot of people are wondering, are they just going to, just undo everything that was established in terms of what would constitute viability? Are they just going to abide by, just leave it to the states, basically? Let the states determine what viability means, as opposed to interfering and saying, well, this falls under that privacy right. And if this falls under that privacy right and is taken away, then the floodgates are literally open to other, protections that fall under that privacy umbrella being stripped away as well. And, I've heard, some graphic descriptions of what the lengths to which women would go to obtain some of these abortions. Of course, as mentioned, those who are affluent and, have resources, they'll fly to states that won't allow it, California, New York. But those who don't have those resources, those who are not well-to-do, they will resort to a lot of things that could possibly result in their own lives being at risk. And so, it's just a little irony because, you've got the pro-life argument that, we have to protect the rights of the unborn. We have to protect their ability to, their right to the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But at the same time, would that be at the risk of the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of citizens who, at least at this point are, viable, are walking around, do have rights? What do you guys think?
I think that people like Mitch McConnell are very aware that this is one of those issues that really triggers people very effectively. And so you can get a whole lot of engagement by focusing on this issue, and people will vote totally based on that, and they'll just go along with the other policies, just using that as their spearhead. And so I think that they're very, very aware of that, and they strategize and game around that. And I think that that's what we're seeing. Obviously, this is only affects, like you were saying, people who don't have the means to do what they were going to do regardless. It's based in white supremacy. It's not, it's just, it's a triggering issue that they know they can use, and they do effectively use. They are currently, as we speak, effectively using it. It's really sad.
Yeah. And the thing that, this made me think of is the fact that, and I'm glad you brought up that single issue voter point, Jordan, because it's like you have people who are just completely sold. I've spoken with some people, and I respect their conviction, right? And nothing else matters. Tax policy, healthcare, immigration, everything takes a back seat to this. And the Democrats never really operated that way. We never really pushed what's like a single voter issue turnout. We really didn't have that one. Of course, every now and then you might have someone who may be sold on maybe the ACA is their issue or something, but you don't have huge swaths of people. And then you combine it with the religious support component of it. You have people literally believing they're doing the will of Christ, going out there and saying, look, we have to protect the rights of the unborn. We got to fight back against this godless group of people who are just trying to, kill the babies. And then the thing is like, okay, once the child is born, are you going to support them with Head Start, Medicare, Medicaid? And I've always made that argument. Pro-life should mean pro-life from birth to to Medicaid, right? And even when we're talking about, I know we're going to talk about it later with the mass shooting. I mean, you have literally the GOP, and even Senator Chris Murphy said the GOP literally gave up on kids once they're born and said, okay, now go to school and possibly be at risk to being the next gun victim of a mass shooting, because we're not going to do anything. The pro-life party is not going to do anything to put pro-life policies in place to protect kids from being killed by semi-automatic weapons, by military assault weapons, by any kind of weapons in schools, in movie theaters, in grocery stores. It's And the fact that the Democratic Party, you have Chris Murphy. I remember Buttigieg making that point when he was campaigning in 2020, but you don't have the party as a whole hammering that message down enough to me. We literally have to come up with that counter argument, in my view. Any other thoughts?
I'll offer something quickly. Like, I cannot speak to legality as my esteemed brethren and nibblings here can. I come in more from a grassroots level. So my desire, and I hope to see this before I pass on from this forum, is that the Democratic leadership is as ruthless about its coalition as Republicans are ruthless about their coalition. You know what I mean? Like, I the fact that they have not galvanized about voting rights when white supremacist state legislatures have gone out of their way to disenfranchise people who look like us, and Joe Manchin is being who he is, among other things. Like, I really do not understand how you just need to win by one vote. That's what they did for Amy Coney Barrett. You know what I mean? So why can't we do it for voting rights and like unrig the system in the way that they have rigged it since they realized that the demographics are not in their favor? And the thing I'll say in support of what Jordan said is that, like, they can only win when their people are angry. They can't win on policy. They can't win on morality. They win on like white supremacist furor and misappropriated religious context. And I can't speak to whether Roe versus Wade will be overturned, but I did see this interesting article or masterclass this weekend with Gloria Steinem and Adrienne Marie Brown that talked about if it is overturned by the Supreme Court, it shows that the Supreme Court is crooked and phony, and you just got to resist and disobey in the same way that we always have to when the system is rigged against us, right? So we'll see what happens with the court, but like what I'm hopeful for, and it's unfortunate it has to be this way, but it seems as though people on the right, on the left, only get energized when people take something away from them, right? So like rather than be ruthless and have a 30-year plan, which is what this was, or a 50-year plan, Roe versus Wade is passed, and they're like, we're going to do this, and then 2022, oh my God, surprise, it's here. No, they've been after this for a while. I would love to see the same ruthlessness and strategic execution with respect to policy that benefits people other than the white minority. Yeah,
and what gives me hope? Well, yeah, let me start off with this. What gives me hope about having like representation in terms of more progressive views or more progressive interpretations of the Constitution on benches is the fact that last month, October, NBC reported that President Biden is actually outpacing every other president since Richard Nixon in confirming circuit court judges who have the last word in most federal cases. So, I mean, there's some glimmer of hope here, but at the same time, my view, and this goes back to even last year, as wonderful as Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, and as much of a legend as she was, my question was, why didn't she retire when we had the majority, right, in Congress during the early Obama years? Get someone young in there, make sure we have like a safeguard against what we have now, which is a huge super majority for conservatives. And even right now with Breyer, I mean, this is the time to step down. Let somebody replace you with someone young to play the long game, basically. Because Republicans have been playing the long game, I think, since after they were just disappointed with Earl Warren. Eisenhower said Earl Warren was the biggest mistake of his presidency. And of course, Earl Warren went on to be on the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court. And they wanted to make sure there are no surprises here. Every person who comes from the Federalist Society who is going to be selected or possibly selected for any kind of nomination for the Supreme Court or Circuit Court are going to have to pass this litmus test. And on that litmus test, a key jewel on that litmus test is, where do you stand on Roe versus Wade? Are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? And if you're pro-choice, goodbye. But if you're pro-life, okay, now we can move on to step 2. And the Democrats, they're very, very ruthless, like you said, Mr. Hubbard, in that respect. Very strategic and surgically focused on the fact that they have to get folks in there who are going to carry out their agenda effectively and use the court's interpretation to do so. And then you add what happened with Bork, in the late 1980s. I know I was watching a PBS Frontline documentary. They said that was the turning point for Mitch McConnell. He made up in his mind, look, I'm going to play the long game. I'm going to be in the Senate for a really long time, and I'm going to make sure that I get revenge on what the Democrats did and preventing me from and preventing us from getting Robert Bork on the Supreme Court. Any other thoughts before we pivot to? Okay, go
I
ahead.
just want to say, I think that with regard to what we're saying about the court, the court's biggest fear is like losing legitimacy, because it's all the court's whole power is based off of our deciding to follow them. That's it. They don't really. It's not that clear. So if this does cause enough of an uproar, I think that I like to charitably think that that's part of why Ruth Bader Ginsburg would not want to like leave with strategic timing. There's obviously ego plays a role in it, but then the other aspect is like it does cause someone to question the court's legitimacy. But it's the Republicans who are really against this whole court packing idea. So if they push it too far and people get open to the idea of changing that Supreme Court's composition, they might have ended up cutting off their nose to spite their face.
No, that's a real point. And the Democrats have to do better in combining everything into one. And I think the Lincoln Project does this all the time. And that's the difference between regular DNC ads and Lincoln Project ads, is that you consolidate everything to one issue. So we're talking about life. We're talking about life as it pertains to mass shootings. We're talking about life as it pertains to, everything, not just the birth, but the quality of life that you have once you're born. Will you be subject to being another casualty in a mass shooting? Will you, have to, pinch pennies when it comes down to your prescription drugs? All of these things, boil it down to something that they can understand, something bite-sized, something that hits home, something simple, and then galvanize people, give people, and I think Professor Foster mentioned on this on, 2 episodes ago, give the people something to vote for in a midterm year. African Americans, of course, historically turn out low in these kinds of elections. Make this a referendum on the fact that we can't afford to sit this out. Look, you have people actively vying to strip away your rights. And if you don't get up and do something about it now, it's only going to get worse from here. And that sense of urgency that was present last fall, they just have to bring that back. And they have to do it by, the way I think Chris Murphy did it on the Senate floor just last night, But I guess let's just talk about it, since we're kind of, already mentioning it. The mass shooting that took place, the Michigan teen in Oxford High School, 15-year-old boy was charged with murder and terrorism for a shooting that killed 4, fellow students and injured others. No motive was offered by Oakland County authorities. That was a day after the violence took place at Oxford High School, roughly 30 miles north of Detroit. Prosecutor Karen McDonald said the shooting was premeditated, based on a mountain of digital evidence collected by police. She's also said that she's actually going to charge the parents of the 15-year-old for not securely, securing that gun away from his access. She said this was not just an impulsive act. And so, she went on to say he deliberately brought the handgun that day with the intent to murder as many students as he could. You already see her laying out the case for, in my view, first-degree murder, of which premeditation is a key component. And that was, going back to the Rittenhouse case, that was the one thing that the jury found that the prosecutor did not show, premeditation. That was one of the counts in which they found him not guilty, right? And so in this case, by putting out a public statement like this, she's already kind of like training the public to think about it in that manner. Now, of course, every time we have events like these, the next question is, we go right back to square one where we were last time something like this happened, which was, can we get something done on Capitol Hill, right? We had the Senator Coons and Pat Toomey bill, or no, it was the Senator Manchin and Pat Toomey bill pertaining to gun control that looked like it was going to go somewhere, but did not end up going anywhere. In this era where a lot of people are looking for bipartisan wins, Biden, of course, riding off the wave of the infrastructure bill, which got Republican support in the House and the Senate. Is it possible to have something that the majority of the public already seem to be in favor of, with bipartisan support moving forward, realistically, moving into the new year.
Hey, who are these lots of people looking for bipartisan wins? I don't think I've seen too much from these folks. So I was interested in this because I was like, this is, it was quarantine. Like I felt like, okay, like during quarantine, this is something we had to deal with, right? So now the quarantine is kind of ending. Now this is back. So I started looking it up, like some of the numbers, and it's interesting. Like 2020, there were 96 shooting incidents, which was down from 130 in 2019. But already in 2021, even with schools being, maybe 3/4 open, they're open sometimes, but they're closed a lot because of this and that. We're up to 144, which is about 3 times what it was in 2013, which was 50. So between 2013 and 2019, it went from 50 to 130 in like 6 years. And then it went down by like 40 from 2019 to 2020. But in 2013, there were 50. And in 2020, there were 96, even though school was closed for like the whole year. So I was trying to figure out how that made sense. And it turns out that the other thing that increased at a similar rate was gun manufacturing in the country. So between 2009 and 2021, firearms manufacturing doubled, imports more than doubled, the number of manufacturers more than doubled, and the number of ammunition manufacturers more than doubled. So like if you continuously make more and more and more and more guns, and you don't address the fact that there is a supply glut of guns, like if you're a manufacturer, you have all these guns, you're going to make a market for them. That's just what's going to happen. You're going to find a way to sell those guns unless the government makes you stop. So if there's no barrier for the production of additional guns, there are going to be more guns in the street because those guns are going to find their way by hook or crook into somebody's hands. They're going to sell those guns. So I think that what we really need to do is actually look at these manufacturers. And I think that people who feel like you're trying to take their gun away from them out of their hands might be a little bit more open to that. Like we don't need to be making 7 million guns a year. We can slow that down. Like we don't need to have so many. And then that can reduce the access to guns, which could reduce gun violence.
Yeah. And go ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
I would just say if anyone is hoping for, expansive gun reform legislation, I'd like to borrow some of your optimism because, almost 9 years ago, we're actually pretty close to that time actually, Mitch McConnell decided that the death of a bunch of first graders in Connecticut was not worth as much as the donations that he received from the NRA. And as a result, we don't have a comprehensive gun reform bill that was being debated in the Senate never saw a vote. So, we're 9 years later. We've Sandy Hook happened. Various other school shootings happened. Parkland happened, which even resulted in a literal march on Washington. And we're still, in the same place as the only country where mass shootings happen regularly. And we keep saying that there's no way to stop this from happening regularly. Even the Lincoln Project is led by people who think Sandy Hook was a false flag operation carried out by the Obama administration to take your guns. We're not getting out of this unless we really, it starts with the grassroots. It really does, but we need some aggression from Democratic leadership, who seems to be the only people who care about gun legislation. And that means playing hardball with the holdouts on Capitol Hill, which party leadership has not been willing to do.
Yeah. Mr. Hubbard, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that I do not think, I don't think that anything's going to happen legislatively in the 117th Congress with respect to guns, because you need Republican votes in the Senate, and I just don't see that happening. For just to be explicit, and to talk about what Jordan said with respect to the statistics. The one thing that America is awful at, of the many things, is that if there has been such an accelerant with respect to mass shootings, what happened, right? So in addition to the guns, we haven't talked about like the mental health crisis in the country. Like we have experienced 780,000 people dying from a pandemic on the heels of a really traumatic experience at the hands of the Trump administration. So this is like my yogic and Buddhist side coming out, right? So spiritually, we are in dire straits. And so if you're 15 or 16, you've been locked out, and the only thing that you had prior to, you didn't have good social skills because you were like this the entire time, and then you're forced to go back into people. Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Like, that's a lot. And like, no one's really talking to these kids about like, hey, you okay? Because we don't talk like that in our society. So I'm not saying this is as a means of like covering for the explosion, but people aren't well. And we don't talk about people not being well. And with respect to the case of the prosecutors outlining, I mean, I wish they'd done a better job in Wisconsin, but you can't make a 15-year-old the heavy for poor mental health conversations, a glut of guns in the country, and political ineffectiveness by the Republican Party on Capitol. You know, like this one kid cannot take the brunt, or should take the brunt, for like a societal problem that refuses to acknowledge mental health, that refuses to like follow the will of the people who want sensible gun control and gun legislation. Like, that's not this kid's fault. That does not absolve what he did, but that's not this kid's fault, right? And so like, somehow we've got to figure out a way to level up our conversations about how we take care of one another, and not when someone does something tragic like this, oh, it's all hit like that. That's too simplistic, and it's not going to heal anybody.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, there's a reason why the kid didn't have that much easy access to his dad's car than he did like to get his dad's gun, right? And in addition to that, you know, I was thinking there were so many angry voices about who are just angry at the fact that schools were being closed. And it became the defining issue for Virginia's gubernatorial race, right? Critical race theory just came like as a part of that kind of anger, with in addition to the fact that my kid is at home, you know, struggling because he has to learn through a computer. Now you're going to teach him Toni Morrison. You're going to teach him all these things the thing is, like, critical race theory, as was said repeatedly, it was not part of the curriculum for, you know, these high schoolers, these middle schoolers, these elementary students. But what Glenn Youngkin was able to do was convince them, well, you have a stake in this, even though there was no there. And while they were focusing on this non-issue, the actual issue, the state where Virginia Tech happened, right? Mass shootings was left unmentioned. No one focused on that. And the fact that that was the case, to me, is a failure from the Democratic side. Like, bring up the fact that there are real threats to your kids' lives that don't involve any kind of made up, you know, whatever you have, whatever stokes your prejudice or bias. There's actual threats to your kids' lives, and they're coming in the form of mass shootings, and we're not talking about it. We need to do something about it. Going back to Jordan's statistics, you know, you do have, in addition to what he was saying, you know, around, according to the Pew Research Center, half of Americans, 48%, see gun violence as a very big problem in the country today, and that study was conducted in April of this year, right? 49% say that, you know, that they feel the same way about the federal deficit. Of course, 48% illegal immigration, 48% the coronavirus outbreak. So gun control is right up there in terms of what people are, you know, viewing as the biggest concerns for, you know, the country, for themselves. Roughly half of Americans, 53%, favor stricter gun laws since 2019. And so when, you know, you have Chris Murphy, who made it, you know, when Chris Murphy got elected to the Senate, he didn't have a defining issue. He didn't have a pet project. He was elected in 2012, and he was kind of like finding his way. And right after that happened, December 2012, what happened? Sandy Hook. So then he jumps on that and says, I'm going to be the champion for gun control, right? And so he's now saying, look, I listened to Republican colleagues come down here one after the other today and talk about the sanctity of life at the very moment that moms and dads in Michigan were being told that their kids were not coming home because they were shot at school due to a country that accepted gun violence due to a Republican fealty to the gun lobby. You know, that kind of fervor, I think, is in alignment with what the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas kids were presenting the country with, right? Once they were the next targets, it was like a huge national movement, and I was a part of that. The crowd on the March for Our Lives rally in March of 2018. It was dynamic. Like TV couldn't capture it correctly, and we, to me, Biden needs to jump on this. This is a great opportunity. You have a lot of diverse support for this. Because it's not even just in like predominantly white schools, like or affluent schools, but you're talking about gun violence in Chicago. You're talking about, there are Black parents who their concern is whether or not their kids can come home safe. Build that coalition, jump on this thing and run with it. And ironically, Tucker Carlson, who's a heavy hitter, on Fox News at night, he's now calling Alex Jones, who called called the Sandy Hook elementary shooting a hoax, a false flag exercise. He said that he's actually more credible than a lot of the journalists that are going on today. So, that just goes to show you the seriousness with which the other side views this issue. You can't expect anything from them anymore. Move forward without looking for bipartisanship, like you were saying, Jordan. Any other thoughts?
I also think, one last thought is that a major signifier of how much America has lost the plot on guns and gun control and gun violence is that I'm 23 years old. I was born in 1998. Columbine happened before my first birthday, but I still grew up doing these active shooter drills in high school. During the insurrection, Nancy Pelosi's older aides said that it was the younger interns that kept everyone in her office safe because they remembered what to do from their school shooting drills. So they put the, dark paper over the windows. They blocked the doors. They hid everyone away from windows because they knew what to do because they had grown up hiding from active shooters. 23-year-olds having, 20 to 23-year-olds having to keep 50-year-olds safe because of the conditions they grew up in. And the fact that that wasn't talked about more, the fact that that isn't considered a massive policy failure, I don't know. I really don't know what to tell you.
I've never heard that before, and I appreciate that because that leads me to believe that it's y'all that will help fix this mess, right? Because unfortunately, there are tremendous policy failures that led to, I'd never heard that. Like that's crazy town, right? So younger folks just like, do this. People like, like that. Nathan, thank you for that. Like that's mind blowing.
So in the last 10 minutes, we have more than 60 historically Black college and university leaders are urging Senate leaders to pass President Joe Biden's $1.7 trillion social spending bill, which includes billions in funding for their institutions. You have Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer saying there's been a consistent focus by the administration and Congress on correcting the historic underfunding of these great institutions. The HBCU presidents and chancellors added that the $10 billion for HBCU Hispanic serving institutions and other minority serving institutions in the bill is a significant down payment on investment in an American future full of talented citizens who are not inhibited by where they come from or what they look like. So HBCUs in context received renewed presidential attention since the Trump administration. They've been ramping up pressure on Congress to include money in the bill for upgrading aging campuses, which have long been underfunded by the federal government. Under the bill, which was passed by the House right before Thanksgiving, minority serving institutions would receive $10 billion, about $4 billion, $3 billion from the Education Department and $1 billion from the Agriculture Department would go towards research and development infrastructure for these institutions. Minority serving institutions would also receive $6 billion for institutional aid under Titles 3 and 5, a five-fold increase from amounts that our institutions have received annually through these funds, said one of the HBCU leaders. Now, this is in alignment with that whole kind of theme of rebuilding America, like that infrastructure mission, right? You have HBCUs that have been severely underfunded. And I even had Professor Sherman Rogers, who is very knowledgeable when it comes down to, congressional budget, economics. He himself is a stockbroker and wrote, many books, one of which was dealing with the economic policies of the Trump administration. He said, look, HBCUs have been receiving funding. I know the article I, just alluded to mentioned the Trump administration, but, there's been a slice of the pie that's been allocated to HBCUs before that predates Trump's presidency, right? The difference, the thing that people were getting attention for was that the fact that he decided to continue it in his presidency. And of course, there was a big photo op with all the HBCU presidents there early in his administration. But of course, everything with Trump was like quid pro quo. I give you a continuation of this policy. You give me a photo op for my election campaign, right? So in that respect, it kind of like puts things in perspective, because a lot of people were saying, well, look, Trump did more for the Black community than Obama or, than previous presidents. And the thing you got to realize is look at everything in context and then make your assessment. But what are your thoughts on the HBCU's pressure on the Senate? Being that you have Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema following his lead, of course, as the potential holdouts for the Senate's chances of passing this piece of legislation.
I wish
Just
there were more.
thinking of,
Go ahead, Nathan.
go ahead, Reggie. Oh, okay. Just thinking of what that money could do for not just, the larger HBCUs, the schools that we've all heard of, your Howards, your AUC schools, your Hampton, and all the other big places, but what it could do for a smaller school, for a smaller HBCU like the one I went to, where even a few $1 million would be radically transformative as far as building a campus for the future. So, Joe Biden's promise on the night the election was called for him was that the African American community had my back and I'll always have yours. This is his way to put his money where his mouth is. So he needs to be the one, in the Oval Office making these calls. Vice President Harris, who was a Howard alum, needs to be making these calls and making sure that this goes through, especially as, there's a enthusiasm gap among Black voters, but also a general feeling that tokenism isn't enough anymore. That it's not enough to have Black faces in these spaces if said Black faces aren't doing enough for the communities they come from and aren't actually lowering the ladder to make sure that there are more who can come behind them.
All I was going to say is that I wish that there were HBCUs in West Virginia and Arizona, right? Because like that would assist in like leveraging the votes in the Senate. But I do think there could potentially be an opportunity, because a lot of these are in southern states, to at least register in the radar of these senators, like, hey, we're here. It may not influence the vote per se, but part of the problem that Republican senators in southern states specifically have is they don't feel that they can lose, right? Like they only play to the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the Republican primary electorate, and they don't play to the other constituents in their state. You know what I mean? So I think that HBCU presidents, especially with Republican senators, it would be a delightful experience to lobby them. I'm sure they have some relationship, but just lobby, because, I mean, it's not likely, but you just never know, right? You never know. You put a bug in enough people's ears, you just never know what'll happen. Because it's definitely not going to happen, because there are no HBC. Well, there's one in West Virginia, I think, but like there's no, I don't know about nothing in Arizona. Tribal schools, yeah, but HBCUs not in Arizona.
Yeah, I agree that it's great. I'd rather they do this than not do this, but like who's making their decision based off of what the coalition of 80 HBCU presidents said? I like that they're giving that energy out there. I think that what I would like to see more is, them communicating to each other, okay, like how are we going to collectively maximize the effect of the money that we are likely about to get and the money that we already are getting, because HBCUs have been, over the last couple of years, been getting a lot of money, and there are some questions about how that money and where that money is going to be spent. So I think we need to be really attentive, because if this does get passed, I know that I'm not sure exactly how the allocation of the money works, but I know that there's about 100 HBCUs, and you're talking about $10 billion. So that's a lot of money on an individual scale for each of those schools. And so I think that what I would like to see them focusing on is how are we going to make sure that we create ecosystems of value and exchange that can maximize the effectiveness of this money.
Yeah. And one of the things that President Biden did this year that didn't get a lot of attention in the realm of education, of course, was that, over 323,000 federal student loan borrowers, received, and a total 5.8 billion in automatic total and permanent disability discharges, right? And so basically student loan forgiveness for disabled students. I mean, this was something that was huge, didn't get a lot of attention, but if he does, if he is able to go out there and say, look, I'm with the HBCUs, right? Use the bully pulpit, get the HBCUs to say, look, I'm literally on your side with this. Let's pressure Manchin. Let's send him to me. In my view, she's just going to go ahead with whatever Manchin does, because I don't think she wants to be that one senator on the outside getting all the pressure from everybody. But Manchin is the one that really, he was the one that reporters looking at. He reportedly did not clap when, senators mentioned the Build Back Better Act coming next in the infrastructure bill ceremony. So all eyes are really on Joe Manchin, to be honest with you, in terms of what he does. And so, if you get pressure to say, look, this is what the people want. I know, a guest of mine said, because his political future is not really in the hands of Black voters in his state, that really gives him some leeway to say, I'm not going to do this, and I'm not going to suffer at the polls for it. But if you go ahead and, nationalize this thing, get this thing in campaign, activate all of the student organizations. I mean, a lot of the student organizations on these HBCU campuses, educating them as to what's at stake here. Possibly, this could actually turn the tide, not just for HBCUs, but for the whole Build Back Better agenda, which includes, paid family leave, that includes, environmental justice policies, so much. Any other thoughts before we close tonight?
I'd love to see FAMU organized to get Marco Rubio out. You know what I mean? So like the way that Manchin has less power is if the majority is like 52-48 or 53-47, right? In a 50-50 split Senate, like he's all powerful because like whatever, you know what I mean? But like if HBCUs organize and do something in North Carolina, do something in Florida, and keep brother Warnock in Georgia, like. Yeah. And Manchin's less powerful. So like I'd love to see that, but we shall see.
Yeah, and even make this part of Stacey Abrams' bid for governor, right?
Absolutely. See, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
Just piggybacking off that, I think that and this is just effective tangent, this whole energy of we're gonna lose this upcoming midterms, and then we're gonna try to recover from there, and there's a whole lot of pessimism from the Democratic side, and a resigned type of pessimism that really freaks me out, because that's not how you win ever in anything. And so it's just really strange and disappointing when the people who are supposed to be the rah hype people for striving and trying to win are like, oh well, it's not looking good. Meanwhile, you have people like Stacey Abrams out here who's like a superhero who you could just be talking about instead. Why are you even saying these negative things? What is that? If it's not to get people excited to try harder, what is the point of even saying something like that? So that's an energy that I feel like I need to stop seeing.
I'll put one quick thing out there, because I know you're closing, Mike, is that you talk about energy, so the yoga teacher has to speak up, right? So like it is du jour for people in DC to be pessimistic, right? Like, because as one of the lead strategists for impeachment, like when Rashida Tlaib said we're going to impeach the MF, like that was my party, and like we helped launch that baby into the universe. When she said that, there were like 6 people in Washington, D.C. that thought that was possible. Like me, Rashida, Ayanna, like Alex, and like Ilhan, right? Like, so like, but you have to have the radical craziness of optimism to do historical things, right? So it takes people to be like, historically, people lose in the midterms, but you know what? We're going to buck history. So like, I'm giving a lecture next week to that theme. So Jordan, thank you for putting that in my head, because if you say you're going to lose, guess what? You just might. But if you say you're going to win, guess what? You just might. So why not? If you can lose either way, why not err on the side of winning?
Well, Mr. Hubbard, you're going to have the last word. I want to thank Nate Honore, Jordan Strudwick, Mr. Reginald Hubbard for this really dynamic, insightful, exciting discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I want to encourage you all to stay engaged and to stay informed, and I want to thank you for your viewership. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude episode 54 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching.